afternoon. I am Crystal Russell, and I'm the founder of Destiny Driven, where we facilitate critical conversations on controversial topics to bring about a better conversation and a sense of communication and community. We want to welcome you to our third virtual debate. This one is a hot topic. It's on compulsory voting. Should voting be mandatory? We all know that we have an important election next month, and today's conversation is needed. So I want to thank all of our special guests for being here. We want to thank our judge who's been rocking with us from the very beginning. We want to thank Chris Colvin for being here. We're going to have Jason Barnes join us a little bit later, and we have Dr. KJ King Jupiter, and she's my professor. A couple of weeks ago, Dr. KJ asked an important question about how can you get students to think critically. And I really thought about that long and hard, and I said, you know what, debate is one way that we can do that, because these students have researched both sides of the argument. These students are going to argue both sides of the argument, so they have to jump outside of their perspective and look at something from another person's lens. And you know that takes critical thinking. So I want you to know that you are in for a treat, and I want to thank everyone that's on this live today for being here and for supporting us, because you know that it's important. So if you're here, I'm going to ask that you go ahead and share it. Share it with your friends, share it with your church members, share it with your uncle, your cousin, share it with everybody, because people need to see what these young people are doing here in Montgomery. We have our co-host Duncan Kirkwood at this time. If he can unmute himself and introduce himself. After that, we're going to go ahead and get straight into the debate.
Hey, how's everybody doing? This is such an important topic with all this going on right now. I'm so happy. My name is Duncan Kirkwood. I'm a speaker, trainer, and an author, a social justice advocate. And seeing these young people to deliver these type of powerful conversations is important. I know Crystal said that these young people actually compete at a national level. So these Montgomery teens actually are competing at a national level in a national debate. But those debates aren't public. So y'all don't get to see these amazing young people doing their thing, preparing for weeks, traveling, like really doing good work, giving great debates. So we wanted to make sure we did these type of public events. One, so you can learn about Destiny Driven, but two, so these young folks from Montgomery can showcase this talent and their amazing voice and be a part of these conversations. So it's really great to be here. And I'm not gonna talk too much because y'all came for the young folks. So I'm gonna just go back on mute and kick it back on stuff.
So now let's introduce the young folks. We have Michaela McDonald. She is representing Lamp High School, Magnet High. We have Maya Boyd. She's representing Carver High School, and Haley Mullins from Brubaker Technology, Magnet High. We're so excited. You all are in for a treat. Without any further ado, we want you to sit back, relax, engage. If you love what you hear, go ahead and hit that love button. If you like what you hear, hit that like button. And we want you to have a conversation with us. This is a community conversation. So comment down below. Without any further ado, let's debate. I'm going to go ahead and give it to you, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Crystal. Yes, I'm excited to be here, guys. How are you doing, ladies? Everybody's fired up?
Yes.
Crystal gave us, and I'm sure she shared with you, sort of a different format than we've used before. Just for those people watching, just to give them an idea of how it's going to operate, we're going to have 3 rounds where everybody will debate twice. Each round will consist of an affirmative speech and then a negative speech, and then what we call a crossfire cross-examination, where they get to ask questions back and forth. And then we'll have a negative speech of 2 minutes in length, followed by an affirmative speech of 2 minutes. And it's a trimmed down, sort of narrowed down version, so we get the ladies have an opportunity to speak or speak on both sides of the topic. So very excited. I think our first two debaters are Michaela and Maya. Is that correct? And Michaela will be starting off on the affirmative side, followed by Maya on the negative side. Are you ready, Michaela?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Chris. Right. Chris, I'm sorry. Before you get in there, for those who might not know, can you just lay out the topic just so everybody is clear on?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. The topic is, in a democracy, voting should be compulsory. So in a democracy, voting should be compulsory. So Michaela is advocating for a society mandating that everyone in the society has to vote, Maya will be arguing that it not be mandatory and people get to choose whether or not they vote. We'll put 3 minutes on the clock for Michaela, and Michaela, we're ready whenever you
are. Okay, great. Thank you all. Voting should be compulsory in a democracy. Contention 1. Mandating voting would eliminate felon disenfranchisement. Felon disenfranchisement is the taking away of voting rights from felons. According to the sentencingproject.org, as of 2016, 6.1 billion Americans were prohibited from voting due to laws that disenfranchise citizens convicted of felony offenses. In a democracy, people have the authority and the power to vote for who they want to represent them. Yet, they may be denied one of the most common and heavily talked about rights they possess, the right to vote. NCSL.org states that 2 states allow convicted felons to vote, 14 states allow felons to register to vote after they are released from jail or prison, 22 states allow felons who have completed parole, probation, and their sentence to register to vote, 10 states allow felons to wait until after their sentence is over to request restoration, and 2 states permanently ban felons from voting. In addition, the sentencingproject.org also states that 20,000 people are wrongly convicted each year. Mandating voting would allow for those who have had the privilege of being reintegrated into society, having served their sentence, done their appointed time, and a chance on candidates that would affect their future choices, allow them to give them their opinion and allow them to give their opinion on elections and candidates that would affect their future choices. Mandating voting would allow for felons the right to vote. Contention 2. Racial disproportion has a major impact on the lives of people of color in a democracy, a country with a democracy. The sentencingproject.org states nationwide, as of 2016, again, 1 in every 13 Black adults could not vote as a result of a felony conviction. And in 4 states, Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia, more than 1 in 5 Black adults was disenfranchised. Hispanics are incarcerated in state and federal prisons at higher rates than non-Hispanics, about 2.4 times greater for Hispanic men and 1.5 times for Hispanic women. As you can see, this prevention of felons to vote excludes its own democratic American citizens permanently, partially, or not at all from voicing their opinion, giving their input, and making their voice heard in a democracy. In America, a country with a democracy, the American pledge states liberty and justice for all, yet systemically puts people at a disadvantage, silencing their voices and preventing them from having their voices heard. This clearly does not entail liberty and justice for all. The United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner states that respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, the principle of holding periodic and genuine elections, universal suffrage, are essential elements of democracy. Therefore, mandating voting would help eliminate racial disproportion. Mandating voting would also increase turnout in a democracy. Australia has implemented compulsory voting since 1924. According to an article written by Anthony Fowler of the Department of Government at Harvard University, Fowler stated that the adoption of the policy of compulsory voting in Australia increased voter turnout by 24%. In the Kingdom of Belgium, with compulsory voting, a chart displayed from 1999 to 2019 displayed voter turnout consistently maintained an average of over 80%, with an average voter turnout of 90.16%. ElectionGuide.org. A chart displayed by the United States Census Bureau stated that national voter turnout in the U.S. midterm elections, a country without compulsory voting, reached approximately just above 53.4% in the year 2018. That is just above halfway. In a third country with compulsory voting, Brazil, voter turnout also maintained an average of 79.54%. Member states with mandatory voting during the last European Union elections had remarkable turnout. For these reasons, voting should be compulsory in a democracy. Voting should be compulsory due to the fact that it would eliminate felon disenfranchisement. It would allow for people who are racially disadvantaged at a racial disproportion to allow them and give them a chance to vote, considering the fact that everyone in a democracy who works for their people and where the people are given the authority would be allowed to vote. And it would also increase voter turnout in the democracy, getting the people who the government works for, who people vote in, a chance to vote as well. It would increase voter turnout and allow for equal representation. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Michaela. Very good. It's a lot of information. All right, Miss Boyd, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll put 3 minutes on for you.
Judge, are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Opponent, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Voting access is the... Sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Compulsory voting is the requirement in some countries. There are many reasons why voting should be compulsory. One being not everyone has the time to take off work and stand in long lines at polls. If you have to work most of the day, then most likely you won't have time to go out and vote. There could be many reasons why someone fails to show up. Some people may be sick and fail to turn up to vote. Compulsory voting violates the freedom of choice. People should have a choice on if they want to vote or not. Voting is an important right, but it is also a choice that no one should be forced to make. Our country is so big on freedom, but yet compulsory voting takes away that freedom. It is wrong to punish people just because they don't choose to vote. Making someone vote without a choice would just make it worse in some cases. Example, some people might not go out and vote, so they get penalized for not voting, which can lead to random choice candidates. Compulsory voting affects the right to express religion. There are many religions where people don't believe in the voting process, and they have every right not to vote if it would affect their religion. By making compulsory voting mandatory, it would affect those people who believe that they shouldn't have to because of their religious beliefs. There will be high chances of voter apathy if people are forced to do things against their faith. Having a law that forces people to vote will make certain people who are practicing their religion feel they have denied to practice their right to any religion. Some people will choose not to vote, and they will have violated the law. As a way of making them follow the law, they will be arrested and prosecuted. The cost of prosecuting those who do not vote can be very high. More than likely, many people are not going to vote. Are they planning on penalizing potentially thousands of people who don't vote? If that's the case, then the cost of having to arrest and prosecute anyone who doesn't can be a lot. If we really want to help America, we shouldn't be forced to vote. We should encourage citizens to vote well. We should encourage citizens to vote well or not vote at all. Don't ask your neighbor to vote. Instead, ask the ignorant and the irrational voters, how dare you? Thank you.
Whoops, sorry. Thank you, Maya. Great. Okay, now we're going to have a 5-minute cross-examination period in which you guys can ask questions. We'll go back and forth. So each debater will be able to ask a question, and then it'll be the other debater's opportunity to ask once answered. Okay, we start with the affirmative side. Michaela, you get first question.
What can you say that again? My wife.
Okay, yeah, you're going to get the first question, so you'll ask a question, and then Maya will answer, and then it's her opportunity to ask a question.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Go ahead.
So,
no problem.
Okay, great. So, opponent, in your speech, you stated that not everyone has the time to vote due to work, correct?
Correct.
Okay, well, compulsory voting, the way it's implemented in completely different. Like, for example, they do compulsory voting in Australia on a weekend, so people could have the time to vote. Because most times what we see is that people are, occupied with work and they may have to take care of kids. But if it's on a weekend when most people don't have to work, then that's taken care of. So what would you have to, so that's what I have to say to that. Or what would you have to also say to mail-in voting as well? Or early voting?
If I'm not mistaken, for one, everyone can't do mail-in voting because, we have homeless people and people who might necessarily believe in that. And then, if I'm not mistaken, in the United States, everyone votes on a Tuesday. So you're going to change?
But yes, if we implement it, and we can make it on a weekend. And then you also said,
Michaela.
you talked about,
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Michaela, you're breaking up, so let's go ahead and
Well, you said
log
before
out.
you're mistaken.
And
Do you have
log
any
back in.
statistics that generally actually state that?
I didn't hear what you said. Like, you're breaking up.
What I said?
Yeah, you were breaking
I
up.
can't really hear what you said, but like I heard the first part. But you just can't say, "Oh, we can make it on Saturdays." Some people goes to work on Saturday. Not everybody is free on Saturday. And like I said,
Whatever you said too, I didn't hear you.
Hey, Maya, you have a chance that you can ask her a question about something she said.
okay. You said that it will increase voter turnout, but what about the people who ends up going? They go and they don't vote, and they do an absentee ballot.
What did you say? Can you repeat that again?
You said that it will increase voter turnout, but if it increases voter turnout, what about the people who go and vote but they don't choose a person? It's an empty ballot.
It's an empty ballot. What you were saying again about the people who vote for religious beliefs, who don't choose not to vote just because of religious beliefs, then that's their choice not to fill out an empty ballot. It just won't get counted.
What do you mean that's their choice? So you're gonna penalize them for that? So you're making them go out and vote against their religious beliefs?
Absolutely. Once again, they can fill out and their vote won't count. You can literally put your name down for it and it won't count as if that's against the religious beliefs. But also in your argument, you said that it's that many people don't. Oh, you also said that people get them persecuted. Yeah, what about the countries that have weak enforcement of compulsory voting?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. You're breaking up, kind of.
I said, you talked about the people who, you said the people who are arrested and persecuted just because they choose not to, and you talked about how the cost can be a lot to enforce, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what about the people who, or the certain countries that necessarily don't make it necessarily a penalty, or if it's not? What would you have to say to those countries?
So if it's not going to be a penalty, why enforce it and make it a law?
I didn't necessarily say that it would be a penalty. I'm saying that it won't be a necessarily strict penalty is what I meant to say.
But there will be a penalty. So what would be the penalty if everyone can't go out?
Like, for example, a chart shown here from, let me pull this up. A chart shown here from hold on, let me see. For example, countries such as Australia, where voting is more so like a party, or countries such as Cyprus, where the fine is only about $200.
How much?
What would you have to say to those countries that really don't? The fine is about $200.
You can't say that that's not a lot or that's not a harsh penalty. Not everyone can afford to pay $200.
But I'm saying that if everyone, I'm sorry, but I get that everyone may not have access to pay $100, $200 or whatever the time may be. But if there's a weak enforcement of this, then it's not really going to be much of a penalty. And moreover, if all you have to do is show up and write someone's name on a ballot, then it's not really gonna. You really don't have that much of a penalty. You talked about homeless people. Yeah, I have a statistic that states that homeless people are eligible to vote whether they can make it to the polls or not. For example, if they live in a shelter, if they live on a street, they can just put the street name down and they can cast their votes that way.
So if it's going to be an empty ballot, what's the purpose of them voting? If it's not counting anything, it's just empty. You might as well just have the people who are going to vote, let them go vote themselves. Uneducated voters will hurt the democracy knowing what they are not voting for.
Ladies, that's going to be time on our cross-examination.
Okay.
So here's what we're gonna do. We have 1 minute. I'm gonna give you a minute of preparation that you can kind of gather your thoughts. It'll be Maya's opportunity to offer a final rebuttal, and then Michaela, you'll offer a final rebuttal after her. Since we begin and end with the proposition of the affirmative side, since they're advocating change, the status quo, which is the negative, kind of doesn't necessarily get the last word. That's just how most debates operate. But
And so we each ask one question.
No, you'll make right now. You'll make a state. This will be your final statement to make the negative. Okay, but I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to give you a minute to prepare that. Is that okay?
And Chris, while we're doing this, I do want, because I want people to hear what these young ladies are saying, because they're really spitting some knowledge and it's breaking up. So what I'm going to do is ask that Maya and Michaela would just log off and log back in to the exact same link. While they're doing that, I'm going to ask the Duncan. We want to welcome Jason Barnes to the episode or to the show. So Duncan, if you can engage our panelists for a moment while our competitors come back.
All right. So yeah, listen, y'all, it's a Zoom world. This is the world we living in right now. So we got Wi-Fi going in and out, service signal. I mean, it is what it is. So we rolling with it. We being flexible and resilient. And these young people are killing it. I mean, they came with the heat today. They wasn't playing around today. So we, like Crystal said, we want to hear what they got to say. All right. Jason, you want to come on camera if you wouldn't mind? And I just want to hear, just what are your initial thoughts about voting, brother?
Hey, how y'all doing? Glad to be here. Sorry I came in late. Doing a lot of work today. Actually working on election stuff today with NAACP. So we're phone banking right now, calling across the state of Alabama as we speak. And just thinking about voting, first of all, great job by the two young ladies that were debating. I love to see really good debates, especially on conversations around this. It's really important, like talking about obviously we're talking about the importance of voting and we're arguing over whether something should be mandatory in a country that gives you a right to make a choice to do something. So it's very interesting seeing this argument being had. And the one thing I can talk about in particular about just the importance of voting, in my opinion, is it's just understanding that, one, it's not the first step to it's not the last step to democracy, it's the first step. And what a lot of people, I think, really get confused is thinking, one, well, also because they've been told so long that, or been told just from other apathetic voters that their vote doesn't matter. I think we look at voting from a very macro scale instead of a micro scale. We can use the election of Montgomery's mayor, Stephen Reed, for an example, right? A mayor has much more executive authority over your taxes and ordinances that happen in your city than a president could ever have, even at sometimes more than a governor could have, who is the executive officer of an entire state, for that matter.
Okay, hold on, Jason. I see you turning up. I can see you living and you breathing this.
This is what I do every day.
No. I don't want to be rude, but I want to, because we're going to come back to you. I want to.
They're back. The debaters are back. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So we want to make sure we let them get their thing going, but we're gonna come back to you. So hang tight with us.
We're here for the ladies, man. I want to hear them debate. I'm an old geezer. Don't listen to me talk.
And then Kim, we'll start with you on the next break, okay? So Chris, I'll kick it back to you.
All right, and we're gonna start with that was about a minute, right? So we're gonna go ahead and start with Maya for her closing statement.
Okay. In conclusion, not voting can be a political statement a law would prevent it. The introduction will violate a personal freedom and personal rights. Compulsory voting is not a cure to domestic policy crisis. If someone is unsatisfied with the state and system, they will deny voting despite their electoral duty. That's it.
All right, great, Maya, excellent. Okay, Michaela, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Voting should be compulsory in a democracy. Countries where there are weak enforcement, such as Australia and Argentina, display a penalty, but don't necessarily enforce it. Mandating voting would encourage people to vote and form their own such opinion of the candidates and the electorates that are in their country and who are going to affect them in the democracy that we have. My opponent stated that it would be pointless due to the fact that they don't enforce it, and also stated that people may not vote for their religious reasons. But if we, in turn, once again, mandatory voting is different in each country. And if we, in turn, allow people who may not necessarily be able to vote for their religious beliefs, not necessarily bashing or forcing, but they could just write anyone's name down. So they won't necessarily be voting. They'll just be writing someone's name on a piece of paper, which, if that's their religious beliefs, would not necessarily enforce or make it so that they feel like, I have to be voting. Voting has had a long history of importance. Originally in America, the right to vote was only granted to white adult male landowners, yet we see that even now today, that spectrum and that variety of people has been opened up. And so we should continue to allow our children and allow our country, or allow people in a democracy to realize and recognize that importance, that people have fought and died for this importance, and that it should be honored and respected. You know, the same people that we learned about in the history books, Martin Luther King Jr., Lyndon B. Johnson, and with the Voting Rights Act, and everyone else. We should honor that importance. It would also help to further decrease racial disproportion. If everyone in a democracy is allowed to vote, then that would mean that regardless of your race or regardless of your opinion, you're still voicing your opinion and getting an opportunity if everyone is allowed to vote. My opponent also talked about how homeless people are people who may not be able to enforce the penalty and pay the penalty, may not be able to pay it. Yet we see that many countries such as Australia and Argentina, as I stated before, from the source,
It's
gonna
be time, Michaela. I'm gonna cut you off. That's time, my friend. All right. Great job, ladies. Great job. That was excellent.
Great job.
So Crystal, am I giving like a quick decision? Are we going to the next debate, or?
While you come up with the decision, I did want to caveat on something that Jason brought up before at our last break. So ladies, while we're having this conversation, go ahead and get ready. We're going to have Maya. Now they're switching sides. So in a minute, Maya is going to argue the affirmative. So a minute ago, she was arguing the negative. Now she's going to be arguing the affirmative. And Michaela is going to argue the negative.
Or Haley.
Haley is going to be arguing the negative. But before we get started with that, Jason, he brought up an important point about the importance of your local elections. And a lot of times people, are always talking about the large elections, but they really don't talk about the importance of your local elections. But I had a question for you, Dr. KJ, and me and my students have been canvassing. We've really been trying to get people registered to vote. And someone said that the revolution would not be at the ballot box. So they said that they don't feel like it's important for us to vote because we've been talking about voting for such a long time and we haven't seen drastic change, specifically in Black communities. A lot of the students were talking about different disenfranchising African Americans and how it negatively affects Blacks. So to that, what would you say to that particular point, Dr. KJ? That the revolution would not be at the ballot box, so we shouldn't push people to vote, but we should push people to be, for example, economically independent or for other things besides voting.
The revolution is actually about the ballot box. It's not at the ballot box. And so if what's been interesting to me is to listen to the discussion about compulsory voting in the U.S. After having witnessed the South African move to democracy and accidentally being present when Mandela was elected president, and then also being in Cuba years ago, where everyone showed up to vote, even though we knew Fidel Castro would be president. In both of those situations, a new democracy and a communist country, everybody showed up. Whereas we're one of the oldest democracies in the country and people don't show up. And I think what we don't talk about is the ways that we, particularly as Black Americans, have found that no matter what we do at the ballot box, when we vote, it doesn't make a difference. But the reason it doesn't make a difference is because who's on the ballot. So the revolution comes long before we actually vote. The revolution is about a process where people who are meaningful to us, who care about what the people care about, actually end up on the ballot and proceed through the process. You look at these current elections, we keep getting these wealthy millionaire, billionaires whose ideas align with the wealthy and who keep making decisions about the wealthy. We have to the revolution is about the democratic process. It's not at the ballot box. It's about what happens before.
I like it. I like it. And I think that is a great segue into round two. So I'm going to go ahead and give it to Chris and he can introduce our next competitors.
I didn't want to cut off Chris. I just wanted to piggyback off Dr. Kimberly King Jupiter's point. The power of the people is greater than the people in power. And I think a lot of folks forget that when they talk about, oh, the revolution isn't in the ballot box. No, the revolution is inside of you. You bring whatever you can to the movement, right? And as I said earlier, voting is the first step of the political process, not the last. I think a lot of people think that they're supposed to be radicalized in the ballot box and in that voting booth, but it's about what you do after you cast that vote. And that's whether you vote for someone that, aligns with the things that, affect your family, or someone who doesn't. Even if the person that you voted for doesn't win, it still matters that you walk into that office where their office hours are available, you speak with their people, and you bring your people and your agenda and how it benefits your people to that politician. If they do not do the work to meet your agenda or to compromise or to litigate around legislation that benefits what you're talking about, then you go find another candidate, or you be that candidate that goes to run.
I think that's a very important point. And that's one thing we always try to tell our kids. I like when you said the revolution is inside of you. So I always tell my students, that you have to be active change agents. And that's another reason why what we're doing today is so important, giving these young ladies a voice so that they can be the change they want to see. And saying that, we're going to go ahead and go back to the debate. Go ahead, Chris.
All right. Okay, Maya, are you all ready?
Yes.
Okay, you have 3 minutes whenever you're ready to start.
Okay, Judge, are you ready? Opponent, are you ready? Okay, I'm gonna start. Voting access is the key to equality in our democracy. The size of your wallet, the number on your zip code shouldn't matter. The action of government affects every American, so every citizen should have an equal voice, said John Lewis. Should voting be compulsory? Now that's a good question. Many people say that the government shouldn't be allowed to mandate a person to vote. Why not? In America, you have certain rights as a citizen, but you also have certain duties. For instance, jury duty is mandatory. If you get summoned for jury duty and don't attend, you can be held in contempt of court, fined up to $1,000 and/or receive jail time. If we can mandate people to participate in a justice system many citizens don't even believe in, why skip over the most important duty as a citizen? Why skip over the one thing that has the ability to balance the scales? The thing people fail to realize is that not only that not voting is morally wrong. Basically, if you're not voting, you're a free rider. According to Merriam-Webster.com, a free rider is a person who is supported by it or seeks support from another without making an adequate return. They are selfishly benefiting from the public good of a democratic electoral system without doing their part to maintain it. Non-voters are exploiting voters. Requiring everyone to vote as a democracy will allow everyone to feel included in plans that will affect their future and well-being. So many people have fought and died for the right to vote, such as Jimmy Lee Jackson, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Martin Luther King Jr. Since people have fought and died, lost their lives for our right to vote, specifically for minorities, we have a moral obligation to uplift their legacy and exercise their right. It's not only our constitutional right to vote, but it's our moral duty to execute that right. For African Americans who do not have the right to vote, for women who do not have the right to vote in this country, to not exercise their right now will be a complete letdown, considering the historical context in which people had to undergo to get this right, such as the civil rights movement and the women's suffrage movement. However, mandating voting will allow people of all social classes and environments to voice their opinion and have a say on the laws and regulations that affect their daily life. If voting became compulsory, people will not have a reason to complain if they know they had the chance to vote and choose their leader. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Maya. Very good. Haley, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, we're ready. We're ready whenever you are.
Unlike other countries where dictators and monarchs make decisions on behalf of the people, Americans get the right to decide who runs the country and what laws should be governed citizens. Having a right means you may freely decide to take or not take an action without forcibly interference by anyone else, including people in the government. I have a right to speak right now. Mandatory voting, often referred to as compulsory voting, is a structure where the laws of a nation require eligible citizens to register and vote in elections. If the voter chooses not to vote, then penalties can be imposed if a sufficient reason for not voting cannot be provided. The government and politicians serve the people, not the other way around. Citizens should not be obligated by force of law and against their will to participate in the electoral system. We all say, with liberty and justice for all. The act of forcing individuals to vote with a corresponding sanction for non-compliance is clearly a violation of liberty. A government that values democracy values individual freedom cannot compel its citizens to vote. Voting is defined as a formal expression of opinion. Voting is certainly a privilege. According to the First Amendment, the right not to vote is a form of speech. Forcing an individual to vote would likely to stain which is violating that individual's right to the First Amendment. According to the New York Times, most people believe that more voting causes a better government. This is an article of faith, not fact. Social scientists have shown that higher quality government tends to cause a higher turnout, but higher turnout does not cause a higher quality government. The main benefit of compulsory voting is a larger voter turnout. Of course, if you made each citizen vote, you would have a larger voter turnout. But according to the New York Times, higher voter turnout wouldn't solve our problems. Voters have noble intentions, yet they have systematically false beliefs about basic economics, political science, and foreign policy. If we force everyone to vote, the electorate will become even more irrational and misinformed. There is no evidence that requiring people to vote provides sufficient initiative for them to gain the information necessary to cast an informed ballot. Informed is defined as based on an understanding of the facts of the situation and having or showing knowledge of a particular subject or situation. The decision not to vote is therefore a rational one for those who have not put in the time or effort to discern which electoral choice is best for them or the country. The voting turnout, according to Washington Post, was 55.7%, over half. Making people vote would mean citizens would just choose a candidate just because, not based on information. To people, voting means a lot, and making everyone vote would take away those passionate feelings of others. You vote for a person because you like their ideas and views, not just because you have to. Voters won't be allowed to get to the polls. If voting becomes mandatory, what happens to the people without cars or transportation? What about the people who cannot read or write? What about hospice care patients? Making voting mandatory will put a lot of citizens at hardship. According to CNBC, the United States is currently in $23 trillion of debt. Providing care, transportation, etc. to citizens will cause even more debt. Fees will be paid if you do not vote, or even punishments. You're getting punished by following your rights. Right? Voting is a right and it's given. Although there are many organizations that reach out to people to encourage and inform people to vote, there is no sure way of verifying that everyone in democracy has the right to vote. If we really want to help America, we shouldn't force citizens to vote. We should encourage citizens to vote well. Many individuals claim that voting is a civic duty shared by all who live under one government, but this is not the case. Voting is a personal choice made by individuals who strongly believe in the parties they vote for. Compulsory voting is wrong and should not be forced on anyone. Voting is a right, not a duty. The only votes that carry our weights are the votes
cast by confident voters who stand behind their decisions. Democracy cannot be enhanced when citizens go out and vote just because they have to or in order to avoid sanctions. Only when citizens freely decide to participate in the electoral process can their votes be authentic and truly reflective to their preference. Democratic government is a complex system that values not only electoral participation, but providing avenues for people to express their choice, equality, freedom, and reasoned judgment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Haley. So Maya and Haley, you're going to have 5 minutes to exchange questions. You'll each have a question, and we start with Maya.
Okay, so you said, what about the people who can't read or write or don't have a ride? They have people who can read for them at the polls. There's no need for you to write your bubbling in a circle. The people who don't have a ride, we have shuttle transportation to the poll writings.
How can you ensure? Oh wait, I hear echoes.
I do too.
How can you ensure that each citizen will be casted? Like, how can you ensure that each will have a right to the voting polls?
You can't ensure that every single person will have a right, but majority will. What do you mean by not everyone? Like, who would be the people who wouldn't have a right?
People who don't have cars.
They have shuttle transportations that come pick up. They can pick you up from a house or a certain destination, a meeting point, and they're in your neighborhood.
That can't be ensured for everybody. It's not 100% positive that every citizen is going to make it to the polls.
No,
do you have any stats, statistics, or anything proving that it will be?
No, I don't.
What would be the purpose to mandate voting, since you want it to be compulsory?
Because everyone will have a voice or a say so of what's going on in their country. And it wouldn't just be like, oh, we have this president. Like, they have a choice. They can voice their opinion. They're choosing their president, their mayor, whatever.
Is their opinion based on information, or how will it be informed that they're casting a vote based on information?
What do you mean? Like, we can turn in absentee ballots. You don't have to necessarily choose a person.
Some people don't want to have an opinion. You get the right. Voting is the right. I noticed you mentioned you compared it to jury duty. Duty and a right is a two total different things. Voting is a right, not a
duty. It's the same thing, and people they don't necessarily have to vote. We have absentee ballots.
So what's the point of having an absentee ballot if you want everyone to voice their opinion? It's still an inconvenience. If they're going to turn in a blank ballot, then what's the point of them voting?
Because it's encouraging that person, even the people who don't vote. Okay, so it's not doing no wrong that they're not voting. And then the people who's never voted before, that's encouraging that person to go out and hear about what's going on, having them informed on what's going on in our country. It gives them a person to choose.
Okay, so why would you have an absentee ballot if they're going to be informed? If they're not choosing a person, what's the point?
Okay, they're not choosing a person, but that's not necessarily all the people who won't vote. Some people that might not normally vote might actually go out and vote.
Well, making everyone vote, you're saying that absentee ballots is still going to be there.
Okay, for one, we're not making everyone vote because some people, like, different religions, they don't just go. You can't make them go out and vote because that's a part of their religion. It might only obtain to certain people.
So if that's the case, then why should voting be compulsory? It can't make everyone.
Because it doesn't necessarily have to only be based off religion. That was just an example.
Well, including religion, if that's an example, then it's going to be included. But how will you ensure that each candidate, how would you ensure that the person voting is educated on what they're voting on?
You can't be sure of that. You can't be sure of what anybody votes on because it's their vote. And And when I was talking about religion, I wasn't saying that they're excluded, but they're not the majority of people who don't vote. So that's why I said it was an example.
Do you have the statistics on the majority of people who don't vote?
If I'm not mistaken, it was 55%.
What would what because you categorize religions, so what is the higher,
I didn't have the categories. It was just people in general.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, and that's time. We've got like 3 seconds remaining, so we'll just call it right there. All right, we're going to give you guys a little time to prepare. We'll come back. Haley will have 2 minutes for her final speech, and then Maya will have 2 minutes for her final speech. So do we want to give them a moment to prepare? Would we like to turn it over to Mr. Kirkwood?
Oh, I'm like the fill-in guy? That's what you're saying?
I think so. Hey, you do a great job. I think so.
All right. So listen, y'all, I want to say this real quick. We just saw the presidential debate, which was a circus, and the vice presidential debate that was full of a lot of privilege and a lot of other issues. So to see these young people modeling what debate should look like, right? A battle of ideas with respect and dignity, thoughtfulness and facts, candor. I think this is inspiring and we should all be encouraged. This is the future because we're at a moment where the future could look a different way, right? We could have our young people modeling what they're seeing on TV. And so it's great to see these young women, especially, just tearing it up, like doing their thing. So let me shut up though, because we got some panelists. Let me get an honest response from our panelists. Professor King Jupiter, should voting be compulsory? What's your answer? Should it be mandatory for everybody to vote? And then I'm gonna ask you the same question, Mr. Barnes.
I think the that's a good question, but I think the intriguing question is why do we have to talk about compulsory voting? And the reason we have to talk about it is because so many Americans are disenfranchised through the very institutions that are supposed to educate them and engage them in voting. School, the whole purpose of having compulsory or mandatory schooling in a democracy is to inform and engage people in the electoral process, but instead what schools do is marginalize voices. And so what you have are national elections where 30% of the population shows up or less. Whereas, like I said, you can go to a country like Cuba where everybody knows who's going to be elected and everybody shows up. And you stand there as an American sitting there going, what, make it make sense. And so I think because we have so few people voting, yes, we should move to compulsory voting because there's something about our system that tells some people your voice is not wanted. But I think they make really good points about making it compulsory when you have people who are illiterate about the process and don't really understand the issues. And if we look at the unfolding issues in Michigan where people who didn't like what Whitmer had to say, they wanted to kidnap her and do her family dirty because they are not accustomed to having a civilized debate, which is what a democracy is supposed to be about. So maybe if we make it compulsory, we'll be able to re-engage schools in doing what they're supposed to do in terms of preparing people for the process.
Okay, Mr. Barnes, I'm kicking it over to you. Should voting be mandatory? Should everyone have to vote? Try to give me a 30-second, 35-second answer.
The quick answer is no. The way that you get people to vote is not by making it mandatory. The way that you get a nation in total to vote is to make voting as easy and accessible as possible. If we look at the countries where we see high voter participation, it's not because they're being made mandatorily to vote. It is extremely simple for them to register and actually participate. I saw someone in Canada tweet something the other day, and I'll leave it to you with this. They said, I have participated in 15 different elections, and I never once had to register to vote because it was automatically done for me. And they were making the argument that voter registration in itself is voter suppression, because every person born or a naturalized citizen in this country should be able to participate to vote, and that includes our people behind felony convictions and behind bars currently. Because if a congressman or a senator or a state house representative or a state senator can go to the state house or go all the way to the White House and represent people that are behind bars that have no say-so in their democracy, but yet they're counted for every census, but yet they're counted when resources are being distributed out to states or not being distributed out to states, we have a country that has participated for years in blocking people from access to the ballot, as well as a state that literally invented it if it wasn't for Mississippi saying, hold my beer. So what I will say is this: it's not about mandatory voting that is going to get us to vote. You do not want to punish someone, obviously, for not enacting their right. This is a freedom. That means you have a freedom of choice. However, people would not say that their vote didn't matter if we got rid of the Electoral College, which is rooted in white supremacy, which gave white slave owners and rich men access to vote and did not give poor white men to vote, right? Because those were the only people who could vote when this country was founded, was rich white men, not women, not white women either, and not black people. So from this point, if you get rid of the Electoral College and you let people vote for who they want to see, you don't get a repeat of 2016. And furthermore, when you protect the rights of voters, you don't see things happen like in Texas with voting polls, with voting drop-off boxes being closed down, which was blocked by the state Supreme Court of Texas. Thank goodness. You don't have situations that happen in Michigan where there was a plot by domestic terrorists to kidnap and murder a state, not just a state elected official, the leading state elected official of the state of Michigan, which is they will all do at minimum at least 25 years in federal prison for that, right? So,
Jay.
Sum it up. It's not about mandatory. It's about making it accessible. The more accessible and the easier that you make it to vote, the more people will participate. It's that easy.
Gotcha. So I don't want y'all to think I'm being rude to our panelists, because they're off the chain. They bringing that heat, but we got to let these young folks close out strong, and then we're gonna come right back to our panel. Crystal, I'll kick it to you.
All right. I think you made some really good points, and I'm going to piggyback off of something that Jason said as soon as his closing remarks are over with, but I'm going to go ahead and give it to Chris for the closing remarks. Great job, ladies, and great job, panelists. Thank you.
Okay, Haley, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, you got 2 minutes.
Okay. My opponent compared voting to a duty, which is a moral or legal obligation. And voting is a form of expression, which contradicts itself. Also mentioned absentee ballots. And what's the point of absentee ballots? It will still be an inconvenience. In conclusion, not voting would make an American feel like they are still included and have their rights. It will take away, and there is no fact that higher voter turnout will cause a higher quality government. Each citizen lives differently. Everyone is not into politics or informed enough to make mandatory voting. If they feel they have force, they will just cast a vote just because. Thank you.
All right, Maya, you're going to close this out. You have 2 minutes for your final response.
My opponent says compulsory voting shouldn't happen because some people who can't read, write, or don't have transportation. But we have shuttle buses and poll riders for that. My opponent stated that there will be penalties that people can't afford, but it'll be adjusted for that person, such as Australia and Brazil. My opponent said you vote for a person because you like them, but you vote for a person because they're helping you in your country. In conclusion, if voting became compulsory, people will not have a reason to complain if they know they had the chance to vote and choose for their leader. Compulsory voting prevents the influence of people who participate in the election results of becoming too strong. A high turnout reduces the financial expenditure for election campaigns. This is how the influence of donors on parties and politicians is decreased. Voting is a democratic and moral duty. So why shouldn't it be directly written in law? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's the end of round 2. We have one more round. Our final round will have Haley and Michaela. And again, they're going to switch sides. So these students are having to switch sides. They're having to use both sides of their brains, and I'm so proud of you all. So I just want you to know that. I did want to say one thing about what Jason said and what Haley said. She talked about making sure that our voters are informed. And Jason talked about registering to vote is may be a form of suppression. And when me and my students did a voter registration drive earlier this summer, a lot of our students didn't even know that they had to register to vote. They thought just because they, like I said, are you registered to vote? And they were like, what does that mean? Or they said, well, I'm 18 years old. So they thought just because they were 18 years old that they automatically had the right, that they were automatically going to vote. So a lot of our students were going to go to the polls in these upcoming elections and in November and get turned around. So I think that's one reason why it's important for us as educators, us as parents, us as a community to make sure that we're educating our youth. And not only educating our youth, but educating our community, because it's important. It's essential that we get out and vote. So I really like that point that you made. Awesome round, ladies. And I'm going to go ahead and give it to Duncan.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo your point, Crystal. I think that's super powerful. But a lot of people think they educated about voting, but they're really not. So it's not just about educating the youth; it's about educating the adults, educating the community. It's some cities where Democrats are going to win ABC council seat or ABC mayoral race. So the real election is in the primary, right? But if you don't know that, or if you're not assigned to a party, right, you can't vote in the primary. So when it gets to November, it's candidate A versus nobody. So you really think that you're going to vote, but you missed it. You really missed it because it was on the primary day. And so we need a lot of education going on. And then also don't forget that voter registration is how they pull jury pools. So when we talk about criminal justice, we talk about people getting justice in different cases, they pull those lists of jurors from people who are registered to vote. So if you're not registered to vote, right, then a lot of times we get juries that's letting people off where we want to see justice and we're not getting it. So it's a lot to it. I'm not going to dive in right now, but there's a lot of layers, but it starts with our young people educating themselves and each other like these young leaders. So I'll stop there so we can kick it into the next round, and then we'll go to our panel for we'll give the panel like 5-7 minutes of uninterrupted remarks so they could get it all out and educate us after this round, okay? So, Chris, over to you.
All right. So Haley is going to be our affirmative speaker in this round. Are you ready to? And then Michaela, you're the negative. Are you ready to go, Haley?
I'm ready.
All right. Well, we're ready for you.
Imagine a country where the voter turnout rate was 100%, a country where all of the people of the nation came together to choose their future leaders. People fought so hard to get fair and equal voting rights for all. It should be a legal requirement that every citizen turns out on election day and votes. Legislation should be created to enforce the act of mandatory voting in the United States. If we wish to ensure the legitimacy of a true democratic nation, then we should consider altering voting from an individual option to an obligation, just as jury duty, paying tax, and stipulations for being an American citizen should include voting requirements. Compulsory voting was introduced in Australia in 1924 after the voter turnout of those registered to vote in Australia was as low as 47%. Since voting was made compulsory by the federal government, voter turnout has remained around 94 to 96%. Over 20 countries have some form of compulsory voting, which requires citizens to register to vote and to go to their polling place on election day. This system has proven to not be only effective in bringing in voters to the polls, but also effective in improving a democracy. After the Netherlands removed mandatory voting in 1967, voter participation fell nearly 20 to 20%. Australians tend to have higher levels of trust in their government than Americans have in theirs. According to a recent poll by Pew Research Center, only about 22% of Americans have a high level of trust in federal government. Low voter turnout encourages politicians to design policies that cater to the interests of few over the many. This, in turn, promotes societal division and harms the economy. People will be more prone to pay attention if their vote was required as opposed to being able to skip the political process altogether. Making voting mandatory would give politicians an opportunity to be honest and truthful during their campaigns, because they would not have a certain group of people to appease. Candidates will be able to focus on issues they found significant. A mandate would stimulate the demand side, motivating more voters to learn what they are voting on, just as drafts make the draft motivated to learn what they fight for. If the entire population votes, there will be a more balanced representation of political spectrum. Democracy doesn't work if a large portion of the population doesn't participate. Requiring someone to vote for a particular cause or candidate would clearly violate the First Amendment, but requiring someone to vote for the candidate of his or her choosing in viewpoint is neutral. As previously mentioned, making voting compulsory would inform citizens on candidates. A person is not being forced to express any particular viewpoint when a law requires him to cast a vote for his or her choosing. Since voting has been struggled, voting was not given to all Americans. Voting has a long history of importance. In the first permanent English settlement, this bicameral legislature, the first representative assembly of the English in America, only white adult male landowners could vote. According to ACLU.org, American Civil Liberties Union that works in courts, legislature, and communities to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to all people in this country by the Constitution and laws of America in the United States. In 1866, citizenship was granted to Native Americans, but not the right to vote. In 1869, the 15th Amendment was passed stating the U.S. Constitution granted African American men the right to vote by declaring the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state of account, race, color, or previous condition of servitude. However, in the years 1896 through 1940, laws were put in place by states which prevented African Americans the right to vote. These include the grandfather clause. African Americans were prevented in ways that included literacy tests and poll taxes. It provided that those that had enjoyed the right to vote prior to 1866 or 1867 and their descendants would be exempt from recently enacted educational, property, or tax requirements for voting. After these laws were established, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. This act outlawed poll taxes and literacy tests. In addition, Native Americans were not given the right to vote in every state until 1962. As we see, there has always been a constant struggle for the right to vote since the beginning of a democracy. Such as that in America, we see that people laid down, fought, and died for the right to vote. So much history has went into voting, and if Americans want their government to truly be the people, by the people, and for the people, everyone has to go on polls. Everyone has to go to the polls on election day and take pride in voting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Haley. Thank you very much. Okay, Michaela, are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're ready for you.
Judge, are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Opponent, are you ready? Wait, I can't see you. Taylor, are you ready? Okay,
Yes.
great.
Michaela, you might want to turn your camera off. That might help it from skipping so much. That usually works for me because you kind of freezing and going in and out a little bit, and we don't want to miss what you got to say.
Thank you. Okay. Voting should not be compulsory in a democracy. My value criterion is morality. Merriam-Webster defines democracy as a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. Contention 1. Forcing or obligating someone to voice their opinion undermines the definition of right and disregards the definition of democracy. Mandatory voting, often referred to as compulsory voting, is a structure where the laws of a nation require eligible citizens to register and vote in elections. If the voter chooses not to vote, then penalties can be imposed. The government and politicians serve the people, not the other way around. Citizens should not be obligated by force of law and against their will to participate in an electoral system. Condition 2. Making voting mandatory not only undermines the definitions and initial purpose of having those regulations in place, but mandated voting takes away a third position one can decide to take: neutral. Mandating voting would take away your choice to say nothing. It would take away your choice to not feel pressured by your own government, to have to live with the choices and decisions you made on election day. Think about that for a moment. When you vote for people who will not only affect you, but the others around you and the others after you. In countries with mandatory voting, if you choose not to vote, you receive a penalty. In countries such as Australia, the penalty is $20. Yet in other countries, the penalty is harsher. In Cyprus, the fine is $200. In Belgium, a citizen who fails to vote in at least 4 elections within 15 years will be disenfranchised. And in Greece, a non-voter may have difficulty in obtaining a new passport or driver's license. In countries such as Australia, a voter may vote for only one candidate, give preference to some, or give preference to all. Parliament of Australia. Voter turnout statistics only show that voter turnout statistics would increase the overall voter turnout rate. They do not show why people choose not to vote. While countries may allow you to cast a donkey vote or an invalid vote, this serves no purpose at all. A person is just simply voting just because they don't want to receive the penalty. Some say that mandating voting would help to include everyone to the extent of all social classes, races, ethnicities, and backgrounds, yet voting already included everyone apart from felons in certain countries such as America, and those ages 17 and a half. If voting were to be mandatory, how can we make sure that everyone's vote gets counted? How can we be sure that everyone has transportation to the polls? And furthermore, people have to get educated on the voting laws on their state and obtain resources that they may not necessarily have accessible. They also argue that mandating voting would help to account for all citizens of social classes. However, those of a lower social class can still register to vote. Nationalhomeless.org states that although some states require a place of residence, homeless people only need to designate their proof of residence with a street name, shelter name, or outreach name. If a registrant has neither a current driver's license number nor social security number, then the registrant will be assigned a voter ID number once his or her registration is approved. Homeless people who are in a shelter can mail in their votes. We see that countries, even with mandatory voting, have restrictions as well as like that of Australia. Those who cannot vote are those of unsound mind, are serving prison sentences of 3 years or more, have been convicted of treason and not pardoned, are not specifically registered as itinerant voters, and have lived at an address for 1 month and are living overseas long term with no intention of returning to Australia. State Library of New South Wales. Voting should not be compulsory in a democracy. Mandating voting undermines the definitions and principles of democracy. Mandating voting also takes away the option for one to not cast their vote for a party or candidate they may not want to elect. You may see 2 perfectly good candidates and you may want to cast your vote. But you may see 2 horrible or terrible candidates that don't align with your opinions and your values that work for you in the government and the democracy that we have. And you may choose not to vote. Why should you have to live with the decision that you made that you may necessarily not have wanted to have made in the first place? Those for compulsory voting argue that voter turnout would increase, yet may not necessarily improve the overall benefit and welfare of the individual and the country with democracy. For these reasons, voting should not be compulsory. Thank you.
All right, great job, Michaela. Great job. So Haley and Michaela, we're going to have a cross-examination period. You each get to ask questions. So we will start with Haley first.
Michaela, can you mention your quote, exercised by the people? You quoted that at the beginning of your speech.
Exercised by the people. I said, what did you say?
I didn't get the whole quote. I was asking, can you repeat yourself? Can you repeat the quote when you mentioned something about
the what was it? I'm sorry. It was kind of breaking up.
What was at the beginning of your speech?
What I'm asking, like, what is it on? You said, like, representation. Oh, I said Merriam-Webster defines democracy as a government. Supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections.
And you said it's invested, the democracy is invested in the people.
What were you saying? You're breaking up.
I'm sorry. You said that the democracy is invested in the people. Can you hear me?
All I heard was invested in the people, and I said yes, I did say that.
Okay. So since it's invested in the people, why not make everyone vote?
Because that would just be encouraging people who just don't necessarily know what they're doing or necessarily have the resources to get to the polls.
But resources can be provided if it's made a law. And
How?
You also. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna let you finish.
I was gonna ask if you have the statistics of like countries such as with mandatory voting, such as Australia and Argentina, how they view their compulsory voting, how they make sure that each person isn't ill-informed and actually knows what they're doing.
You also mentioned, hold on. If it's a law, it's against their will. But like, for example, wearing your seatbelt is a law, and everybody has to do that. So I mean, making it a law won't be against their will. It's something
what about the people who don't vote for religious beliefs? And even if something is against your will, there's a penalty for it if not. And so we see that voting, the difference between things such as like paying taxes or wearing a seatbelt or serving on jury duty is that voting is something that it affects you on a day-to-day basis. But the difference between it is like you doing that necessarily, like you talked about like with jury duty and how you're forced to do things like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're forced to those in a sense that you're helping other people. And for example, yet in some things you are still helping yourself. But at the same time, you have to think about the people who don't vote because necessarily they don't want to take a position. I mean, look at our country right now. Look at, for example, America. We have a democracy. We just saw our presidential debates. Many people may feel like they don't want to vote for either or because they're both equally terrible. So why should you be forced to voice your opinion?
You mentioned helping other people. Wouldn't voting help the democracy? Wouldn't making it mandatory help the democracy? And
not
also,
necessarily.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not necessarily. Also talked about equal representation yet. The conversation.com states that Australians are deeply unhappy with democratic politics. Fewer than 41% of Australian citizens are satisfied with the way that democracy works in Australia. So if we see that a country with compulsory voting, and you in your argument also talked about how Americans aren't satisfied with the government, then compulsory voting doesn't change things. In your argument, you also talked about they'll be more prone to pay attention. How can we make sure that people are paying attention and that they're informed of who they're voting for? Do you have any statistics on that?
No, I don't. But you keep comparing to Australia. So do you have any other countries that any more information on any other countries without compulsory voting and compulsory voting? Because Australia is your main point, but there are other countries, and just because they have a perfect compulsory voting system doesn't mean that it works for every other country.
Okay. Actually, in other countries such as for example, Finland, they did away with compulsory voting because they felt like it was unconstitutional and that it goes away with their rights. In your argument, you talked about, can you please provide the statistics of can you please explain like how it has improved democracy, like what you talked about in your argument?
I couldn't hear
because you talked about how has, okay, let me rephrase the question. So you said that you talked about how compulsory voting has improved the democracy. But we see that even in countries such as Australia and in countries where they have necessarily different types of compulsory voting, such as Argentina or, for example, Canada, that not everyone feels equally, is necessarily happy with how democracy works. So how has it necessarily improved democracy?
in a democracy, each person is not going to be necessarily happy either way it goes. So you can't compare that they won't be happy if they don't get the candidate, because either way it goes, when you're voting for either or. So if your candidate loses, then you won't be happy either way, but you're looking for more participation and more true feelings when you go into voting. It's not just.
But you talked about true feelings, but how?
I'm gonna cut you off because our time for questions has elapsed. But that was a great exchange between the two of you. Very good. We're gonna give you a moment to prepare your final remarks. We'll come back, and Michaela, you will start us off, and then Haley will close this out. Okay. I'm gonna kick it back over to you, Duncan.
Yeah, well, while we've got a moment, I want to encourage everybody. We pinned the link on the Facebook video to donate to Destiny Driven. Listen, this is a nonprofit organization that Crystal Russell is the founder and director of. And these are just a few of the young people from Montgomery that Crystal is working with. And Destiny Driven is supporting and developing and building these young leaders. I think you've got, what you said, 5 schools across the city.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. I want to talk about why debate is so important to me and why Destiny Driven is why I'm so passionate about this and what made me, why debate. When I started doing debate a couple of years ago with a friend of mine, Roger Burdett, and we first tried to compete with people in Montgomery, but there were very few teams, there were almost no public school teams to compete outside of the city to compete, and that was extremely expensive. But not only that, I started to see that when we got outside of the city, we were competing with people, and I'm just going to be honest, that did not look like us. So I wanted to know why our public schools didn't have these particular programs, because you all see the skill set that they're developing. These students are learning how to research. These students are learning how to think critically. They're learning how to speak and articulate themselves. So I wanted to know why my school on the west side or the school on the south side, north side, east side, all over Montgomery, why they didn't have this particular programs in their schools. So that's why we started Destiny Driven. Since then, we have been working with about 5 schools. Right now, we have students from 3 different schools. But I'm just going to be honest, the work is just beginning. It's not over yet, because I think that we should have a team in every public school in Montgomery, because it's important. Chris has been doing this for a long time. He just got done with the competition last week. And unfortunately, yesterday, right? And unfortunately, it wasn't that many Montgomery competition, and the competition wasn't Montgomery. It was a Montgomery competition. So everybody else, people in Birmingham, people in Mill skill set, but we have students right here in Montgomery that don't have this. So it's important to me, and I know it's important to you all out there, asking that you donate so that we can make sure, hopefully by next year, I want to have a debate team in every school, because it's important. What these students are learning is important, and you can see how important it is when we watch national debates and they don't articulate themselves the way these young ladies are articulating themselves. So that's why it's so important to me. That's why I'm so passionate about it. That's why we named it Destiny Driven. So help us and help these young ladies get into their destiny. Help them find their voice, because I think that is essential. So that's why we're doing it, and that's why we started it. And I hope you're enjoying it. That's all I have to say.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Crystal. And listen, before we get back to the students, today, well, I think for the next 2 weeks, your donation actually is like a double, triple donation. So because Destiny Driven is doing a fundraising drive, they're part of a national effort, and they're going to match some of these foundations are going to match the donations that are acquired during this time. So if Professor, what you call her, Professor KJ, if Professor KJ, I know she got tenure, if you go click that link and donate 100 today, Destiny Driven might get 300 off that, right? If Brother Barnes donates $50, then he gets in his group text, and they all tell his folks, hey, everybody donate 20, that could triple up for Destiny Driven, and that could allow these young students to continue to learn and grow, get more training, travel more. And so, with that, I'm gonna kick it over to Chris for to open up for the closing segments on this third round, and then talk about the winners, and then we're gonna have hang with us, y'all, because I want to make sure that our presenters got so much knowledge that we give them some time to educate us on what's going on and what we can do. So, Chris, I can kick it to you.
Absolutely. All right. We start back with Kayla. You got 2 minutes. Yeah, we're ready.
Haley, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Voting should not be compulsory in a democracy. For one, making voting compulsory in a democracy undermines the definition of right and the term, and it goes against the morals and the original principles of democracy. Democracy, as defined by Merriam-Webster, defines democracy as a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation, usually involving periodically held free elections. Therefore, the people have the power, not the government, and making someone voice their opinion goes against what those principles and beliefs of a democracy stand for. My opponent talks about the obligation to pay taxes and jury duty, yet we see that those things, they come more on a day-to-day basis. You'll probably never see the people who you click on and choose for a ballot. We see that all the time. For example, you may not necessarily see the candidate who you're picking for, like, for example, Joe Biden or President Trump. You may not necessarily meet them and actually allow your opinion and your voice on what they may stand for to be elected if they are elected. My opponent, talked about voter turnout increase, but it would just increase the amount of ill-informed voters. You can't make someone do something just because they don't necessarily know what they're doing. Going back to what I said, reiterating what I said about the obligation to pay taxes and things like that, people are not automatically, but people are more informed of those things, considering those are things that they constantly have to do on a more day-by-day basis as compared to voting. She also talked about how it would provide for equal representation. And she also asked me about other countries, such as apart from Australia. Yet we see that countries apart from Australia, such as in Turkey, a country with compulsory voting, that according to freedomhouse.org, that LGBTQ people, plus people have little representation in Turkish politics, as well as women. So even though Turkey, a country with compulsory voting, does necessarily make everyone vote, that they still have little representation. She also talked about his or her viewpoint and that you're able to choose, but why should you be forced to choose if you feel like you shouldn't have to? Why should you, in a democracy where people work for you, that you should have to choose? Why can't you be? It's more moral, and it more aligns with the principles of democracy of not having to necessarily voice your opinion. You can decide to take neutral. If you see 2 equally bad candidates, why should you be forced to pick? Because you may think later on the line, hey, my kids are going to be influenced by this person. This person may enact laws. We see that numerous presidents and numerous things have influenced the generations that they probably never even thought that they would be influencing. Such as, for example, the Voting Rights Act, how we all have how we all have the right to vote. She also talked about there'll be, once again, more balanced representation, but even in Australia, we see that, hold on, let me pull up my story, that according to the Video Advertising Bureau, we also see that Australians don't equally feel represented either. People are influenced by what they see and what they hear in the media. Everyone, although it may be harder for some, everyone has the possibility, and if they get educated, if they get the necessary materials that they need, then they have the chance, of casting their ballot and casting and voicing their opinion. It's not necessary. Making it mandatory would mean that people have to take the time out of their day and the time out of their busy schedule to go and do the things that they may need, versus when you have it, the way it is now, like in America country without compulsory voting, where we all vote on a Tuesday, where people can necessarily they can do mail-in voting or absentee voting. Once again, mandating voting should not be compulsory in a democracy. It undermines the definition and principles of democracy. It takes away the option for one to not cast their vote for the party or candidate they may not want to elect, and those and although voter turnout increased, it may increase for the wrong reasons. It would increase the amount of ill-informed voters, and it would increase the amount of people who are just voting just to not receive the penalty. When you're in a democracy, the government works for you. We've seen that in a continuous history and a continuous timeline of how democracy has worked. America has had one of the longest and most historical democracies, and we see that even the United Nations implements the rights and basic freedoms of democracy. Therefore, forcing someone and making someone voice their opinion on something that may go against their religious beliefs, for example, Seventh-day Adventists, does not align and correctly inform people does not align and correctly agrees with the morals and principles and foundations of democracy. For these reasons, voting should not be compulsory. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Michaela. All right, Haley, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. My opponent mentioned if it's a law, it's against their will. But there are many laws that are created in a democracy. Although they may be against their will, you still have to follow them. A democracy is governed by the people, which the power is resting in the people. Making voting mandatory would leave it all up to the people. Also, she mentioned horrible candidates. But as I mentioned, making voting mandatory would give politicians an opportunity to be honest and truthful during their campaigns, because they would not have a certain group of people to appease. Candidates will be able to focus on issues they found significant. A mandate will stimulate the demand side, motivating voters to learn what they are voting on, just as a draft makes the drafted motivated to what they've learned to fight for. My opponent also mentioned uninformed voters, but there's no evidence that ill-informed voters will have a turnout in mandatory voting. If it's vested in the people and left up to the people, then making voting mandatory will be left up to the people. People have fought and died for voting. It is important that each citizen goes out and vote and feel included. Thank you.
All right, great job.
Good job, ladies.
That was excellent. Wow. That's a lot of food for thought right there.
Okay, so go ahead, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
All right, so real quick, now that the debate part is over, ladies, debaters, I want to know your true feelings. Not a soliloquy, just a quick, should voting be mandatory? Haley, you go first.
Honestly, I don't think it should be mandatory, because you're forcing someone to go out, and some people aren't into politics and they aren't going to be very interested in voting. They're just going to choose a candidate for whichever party, and it really doesn't matter. I think you should leave it all up to the people who take voting seriously and that their opinion actually matters.
Okay. Maya.
Basically what Haley said, I definitely agree with that, because some people are just like turning an absentee ballot. You're not making a difference. Like, it's not countering anything. And just like how I pointed out in my debate about people's religious beliefs, like, you're forcing them to do something that they don't want to do. You're forcing everybody to do something that they don't want to do. But yeah, I do not agree with voting.
Thank you. Michaela.
I don't agree with mandatory voting, simply because, like all my other teammates have said, that it goes against what democracy and the principles of democracy. I mean, if we think back to the beginning,
we're not thinking back. Just need the real quick.
Okay, well, I kind of wish that I kind of forgot, but what someone else was saying on what one of our panelists was saying was making it more accessible and doing that sort of thing. I kind of wish if it was more like that, then I would feel like that would really make it. It wouldn't necessarily have to be mandatory, but it would increase people to go out and encourage people to vote.
Okay, Christo, should it be mandatory? Come on, real quick.
I don't think it should. I think that it's a right, it's a privilege. I think we all should vote, but when you force people to do something, they're not doing it because they're passionate about it. They're doing it because you're making them do it. And when they're not informed, I think it could be to our detriment if you make people that aren't informed about voting go out and vote. So no, I don't think they should.
Gotcha. So my 2 cents is, I think it should be mandatory. I think people are, wait, hold on. Before I go into why, no, I'm going to say my why did I go there. It should be, it's already people uninformed going to vote. uninformed people go vote all day, every day. That's the main people voting is to uninformed people. I think the reason I say that is because, and this is my 2 cents, and I respect everybody's opinion, is because we need participation. There is an energy where people subjugate voters. They make it harder for people to vote. They use fear. They use gerrymandering. They use so many ways to disenfranchise people that it changes the results of the election. If everybody had to vote, they would have to identify issues that people cared about more, in my opinion. Now, they might just, everybody got vote and they find some other BS way to subjugate people's voices. So it's not, I don't have the magic answer, but that's my 2 cents. Chris, what you think real quick? And then I want to go to our panel.
I was gonna piggyback on you. I thought the ladies brought up the point of it came up as an empty ballot. And I think if people understood that in compulsory voting, I could cast an empty ballot that says both of you, because I love that Michaela says both of these guys or gals might not be who I want to vote for. I think an empty ballot that you're forced to cast sends a better message than no ballot, no voting, because the narrative is people don't vote because they're lazy. And so people who can't go to the polls, felons, people who are restricted, people who didn't know how to register, those votes don't get cast, and yet they're lumped in a category of they chose not to vote. And so I like the idea of an empty ballot where I cast a ballot that says you both stink, and I want you to understand that. I think a compulsory vote does. It gets people out. It may be antithetical to democracy, but you guys, I loved how the ladies raised all these other issues that showed we all are forced to do the things we don't like to do.
Because when you don't vote, it affects me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
when you don't vote, that affects me. All right, Professor KJ. Can I call you that? I feel so, for Professor King Jupiter. Let me just say it right.
Everybody just calls me KJ.
KJ, okay. I'm gonna let you get your last 2 minutes of closing because our panelists got to talk a lot during the discussion. So we'll let you have your last 2 minutes, and then we'll let Mr. Barnes have his last couple minutes, and we'll say goodnight to everyone.
Well, I want to say this: if we had a clean slate, right? I would agree that it's a right, and everybody feels it's a right. Like to be in South Africa where they were voting for the first time. I ran into this woman who had literally walked for 2 days just to get a voting site. That's in a new democracy. But in a democracy such as ours, where so many people are marginalized, have been disenfranchised, we almost need compulsory voting to get rid of the shenanigans. With that said, I want to just share a very short story. The first time I did voters registration, I was in Alabama. I was a faculty member at Auburn, actually. And we were standing out in front of, I think it was Kroger's. And we were signing people up to vote. And this woman came by, and I said, "Are you registered to vote?" She said, "My husband takes care of that." And I remember my face dropping. I said, "Voting?" She said, "Yeah." So then flip to the Republican National Convention, and this woman starts promoting this notion of one vote per household. There are literally narratives and scripts in our country that tell people not to vote. And so even if you made it accessible, and you had more polling boxes per county, and you had shuttles to the polls, and you removed the identification requirements, even if you had all these other things, there are narratives that disenfranchise women. That statement set women's rights back like decades. And so I don't think it's accurate to assume that somehow if you just make voting easier, that suddenly people will show up. Because what we've seen is that the narratives about not voting are so powerful that we have whole communities that don't even bother.
Got you. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining and taking the time on this Sunday evening. Don't leave, y'all, because we got Mr. Barnes, and then Chris is going to announce the winners. But we're going to let Mr. Barnes, I know you can tell Mr. Barnes got something to say. He got the energy, like, come on, bring the heat for us, Mr. Barnes. Give us your last couple minutes. I know you knee deep in voting and work, and we appreciate you.
I'm doing that, but I'm also like peeking at NFL Red Zone. You got to multitask. Democracy, a little bit of football.
The finals just
started. Finals start in like 25, like in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna be brief. I don't want to take any more of your time because I think what every single person has said today has been great. I want to piggyback off of KJ. Thank you for giving, because I didn't know whether to call you professor or a doctor, but I do agree that there needs to be a clean slate. I'm not for anything that forces something on someone and like is antithetical to democracy. So I do agree with Mr. Colvin on that. But where I do agree also with Kimberly is I've seen first-time voters before, and I didn't have to go to South Africa to see them either. So I'm right here in Montgomery, people who had felony convictions, who had never accessed the ballot before they went to prison. And then once they were released, I remember one of the first people who I worked with when I moved to Montgomery, ended up the first election that they participated in was the mayoral election in this city. And they were actually at the watch party, and they volunteered to work on the campaign and also volunteered on their off time to make sure that they restored other people's rights to vote. So when you teach someone, one, how to leverage their power and their political power in their space, it really opens the doors. So one thing that we have to do, I think that this country has to do, is before it can actually move to some type of way to make it easy to vote for everybody, one has to acknowledge the harm that it is purposely caused and its elected officials has purposely caused, from our legislative branch to our executive branch and to our judicial branch, which is currently being politicized in real time by a political party, and acknowledge the wrongdoings, right? We're not talking about reparations, but the root word of reparations is repair, right? And part of repairing something and righting a wrong is first acknowledging that as a federal government and as a state government, since the inception of this country, it has worked very, very hard to oppress the votes of people who are not white men, right? And so what we have to do is, before we can even get to a space where we can talk about free and fair elections for everybody and no ID requirements and all of these other things and automatic voter registration and ranked choice voting, which I would love to see ranked choice voting across the United States of America. And that can be done by these three women right here advocating for it and pushing state elected officials right here to make that happen. We don't need the federal government to come in and make ranked choice voting something in the state of Alabama. We can do that right here. And like, if we want to get rid of this partisan politics and all of this other stuff, we have to really start talking about the root of this problem. And the root of it has always been voter suppression. So yes, I do kind of agree with compulsory voting to an extent. But what I will say is that I do agree that it's not just about making it fair and easy. It's about acknowledging the harm that is caused. And part of that harm is also the lack of fundamental education in our education systems about the power that voting actually possesses. We have a state that is ranked at the bottom 50 of education. And when it comes to our civic engagement education program here for our public school kids, they are really lacking. Now, shout out to these three women, because they have been absolutely phenomenal and they know so much, but they are exceptions to the rule. And we all have privilege. They're privileged enough to be in an organization like this that teaches them the importance of this. But every little black girl and every little black boy and every little white girl and every little white boy and every little Asian girl and Asian boy and whatever that lives in this state does not have that same type of privilege. So we have to acknowledge that even having this knowledge and sharing it amongst each other right now in this space, in this debate, is a privilege. And we have a lot of people outside that are caught in those margins that don't know this stuff. Now, we can't wait on the state to improve our education system. So that's where we come in, right? As people. As I said earlier, to end my statement, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. And something that my something specifically that Derek Johnson, the CEO of the NAACP, told me when talking about voting. Political parties do not create agendas. They are vehicles for agendas. The driver is the voter, because the driver creates the agenda, right? The agenda is in your hand. You create it. You give it to the politician. They take it to Washington. And if they don't make it happen, you go find somebody that will. And if you can't find nobody that'll make it happen, then you make it happen. So to my ladies that have been on this debate, I am so proud of you. I cannot tell you how amazing it was to listen to you argue the affirmative and the negative of this argument when I know that you didn't really want to support it. I could hear it in your voices. And I just want to say phenomenal job. As a former debater, I bragged about you to my debater friends every single time I get a chance to get on here because you guys do such a great job. But the power is really in your hands at the end of the day. And it's your job to educate those amongst yourself, just like it's my job, about what accessing the ballot really means and what voting really means and what that power looks like. All right? So that's all I got.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here. Crystal, go ahead. I see you came.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dr. KJ. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Duncan. And I really wanted to piggyback off of what Jason said as we close. He said every young Black girl and young Black boy and everybody in Montgomery or in the city and the state may not have this opportunity, but we can be the change we want to be. So I believe that we can give everybody that opportunity. If you help, I can't do it alone. And that's why I'm thankful for everyone who's been supporting us. You can support us still. You can donate down below. Every little bit can help. And I think that if we do this together as a community, because they say it takes a village to raise a child. If we come together and we work together, we can make sure that we may not be able to change the whole world, but we can do some work here in Montgomery, this city. We can offer this program to every student in Montgomery, and that's my mission. That's my purpose. That's my destiny, and I just want you all to help us. I know that these kids have done amazing. I know that you've enjoyed it, so go ahead and give them some hearts down below. Give them some likes down below. Keep encouraging them, because I'm going to encourage them to tell their friends about it, so that this can keep on growing and growing and growing and growing. This is the last time, unfortunately, that you're going to see these students this year, because now they're going to go start competing in the district. Like Duncan said in the beginning, they compete. They're going to be competing with the National Speech and Debate Association. So we gave you a snippet of what they're going to be doing all the way up into January. So please continue to support us. And we'll see you again in January. We'll be around. We'll be doing some community service work. We'll still be trying to get people registered and doing, but you're not going to see us on this so much for being here. I don't have anything else to say. Duncan, do you have something else?
Yes. Chris, who won? Give us the winners, Chris.
All right. Well, y'all have to go.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought these were all just so good.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead. I would have
I was going to say that we're going to give the feedback on our following. We don't want to belabor the hour. It's almost been 2 hours. And so I think that we had a really good discussion, official discussion. All of them did amazing. So we'll give the feedback on our next practice. Ladies, y'all okay with that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we can do that.
All right, so come on to our next practice. We'll give the feedback then. We want to thank everyone for coming out, and we'll see y'all at the next debate. Y'all have a good evening.
Bye, y'all.
All right, bye. Have a nice day. Thanks for watching.
Well, I went off the big screen.